This beer is a German Pils, a crisp, clean, and refreshing light beer that I brewed in my garage. In this video, I'll show you how I made it, a few tips and tricks along the way, and a review of the final beer at the end. Let's brew. A German Pils, as the name implies, is made with authentic German ingredients. For this recipe, I'm using 100% German Pilsner malt and Hallertau hops. Hallertau hops are one type of German noble hop variety that gives a mild, floral, and spicy aroma. The main step of brewing is the mash. This is when hot water is mixed with the grain to create a sweet liquid called wort. For this 6-gallon batch, I'm starting with 3 gallons of reverse osmosis water that I'll heat to 171 degrees Fahrenheit, which for my system is 15 degrees above my strike temperature. When I pump my strike water over to the mash tun, the system is going to cool to 156 degrees, which is my strike temperature for today. While the water is preheating, I'm going to run the grain through the mill and get it ready for the mash. Looking for is to crack it enough so the water can fully penetrate and extract the sugars within the grain during the mash. The key though is leaving the husk mostly intact so that it can act as a natural filter during the lauter. My mash tun is now at 156 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm adding in my salts to adjust my water chemistry. Don't stress over this step if you're a new brewer. This step will really not make any significant changes in the final beer. It's more of a fine-tuning process. However, it is important to use good tasting, chlorine-free water. I'm also adding in 2 milliliters of lactic acid to my water to ensure the room temperature pH of the mash stays within about 5.2 to 5.6. And now it's time to add the grain, so I'm shutting off the pump. This step is called the dough in. The goal is to slowly and evenly mix the grain with the hot water to avoid getting any dough balls. Pouring the grain in too quickly can cause a grain to clump up and prevents water from evenly penetrating the grain. Now that the grain is mixed in, the system has cooled to 148 degrees, which will be the temperature we need to maintain for the next 45 minutes. I'm going to turn on my pump and slowly open up my recirculation valve to begin recirculating through the grain bed. It's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to take a small sample so that I can check the pH. I like to use a small bowl of ice water to cool the sample down to room temperature before taking the measurement. We are right around 5.2. While the mash is finishing up, I will add an additional 7 gallons of water and 1 milliliter of lactic acid to my HLT. And I'll preheat all of that to 170 degrees Fahrenheit for the lauter step. It's been 45 minutes. I'm now going to raise the mash temperature to 168 degrees for the lauter step. The purpose of this step is to aid in the extraction of the sugars in the grain. The warmer temperature of the mash and the hot sparge water will help increase the extraction efficiency as I move the liquid over to the boil kettle. This type of sparge process is called a fly sparge, and the goal is to slowly rinse the grain with fresh sparge water at the same flow rate as I transfer to the boil kettle. This is about how fast I transfer, and for my system, this takes about 40 minutes. If you go too fast during this step, you risk leaving too much sugar in the mash bed, which results in a lower efficiency. I'm doing a 90-minute boil for this beer, so we have a little more water than usual. Our pre-boil volume for today will be 9¼ gallons. The reason for the extended boil is to reduce the chance of DMS, which is an off flavor that sometimes occurs with light grain recipes like this one. I have about 7 gallons transferred over to the boil kettle, so I'm going to kick on the heater as the remainder of the wort is transferred. We are at full volume, so I'm going to give this a quick stir and take a small sample to measure the pre-boil gravity. I'm using the Anton Par Easy Dens to do this, which is a digital hydrometer. This meter measures the density of the wort so that I can record the extraction efficiency of the mash. I love this meter because it only uses a small sample size, and unlike a refractometer, the Easy Dens can be used at all stages during the brewing and fermentation process. It pairs with the Brewmeister app to quickly and accurately record the density, which we'll need to do multiple times during the beer production process. If you would like one of these meters, use my coupon code to save $35 for a limited time only. We are coming up to a boil, so I'm going to add a few drops of anti-foaming agent to help reduce the chance of boilovers. I like to use this agent from More Beer. I'll let the hop break finish up, and then I'll add my first hop addition. This is a 1/4 ounce of Hallertau, which will only add about 3 IBUs to the beer. I'll let this boil for 30 minutes, and then I'll add my next hop addition. It's been 30 minutes. I'm now adding my next charge of hops. I'll let that boil for another 30 minutes and then add in my third charge. There are 15 minutes remaining in the boil. I'm now adding in 1 Whirlfloc tablet, which is used to help clarify the beer and flocculate some of that protein in the wort. For the final 10 minutes of the boil, I'm adding in a little bit of yeast nutrient with my 4th hop addition. We are almost done. The 90-minute boil is finished, so I'm turning off the heater and I'm going to start a 5-minute whirlpool as I add in my last hop addition. It's been 5 minutes. I'm going to turn off the pump and let this rest for 10 minutes so that the trube can form a nice cone in the center of the kettle. It is time to knock out. I have my groundwater connected to my plate chiller, which will be used to cool down the wort as it's transferred into the fermenter. My groundwater here in Southern California is pretty warm at this time of year, so I'll have to do the remainder of the cooling after connecting my fermenter to the glycol chiller. For most beers, I like to chill the fermenter to about 2 degrees below my desired fermentation temperature, which for this Pils will be 50 degrees. While the fermenter is cooling, I'm going to oxygenate my wort through the carb stone on my unit tank. And for 6 gallons, this is about 60 to 90 seconds at a flow rate of 1 liter per minute. Once the wort is pumped full of oxygen, I'll take a small sample to measure the oxygen concentration, the pH, and also the original gravity. For most beers, you want to shoot for about 10 to 15 ppm of oxygen. And next, I will take the original gravity measurement with the Easy Dens. I'll open up the Brewmeister app on my phone, and I'll save the measurement to today's batch. The last step for today is to pitch the yeast. About 36 hours ago, I made a starter for my lager yeast. I'll include a link down below if you'd like to learn more about that process. When brewing lagers or strong beers, it's important to pitch a fairly large amount of healthy yeast. For a batch this size, that usually requires about 2 to 3 pouches of yeast, or a starter like I'm using. I'm going to allow this to rise to 50 degrees and I'll keep it there for about a week until we hit a gravity of about 10-15. Then I'm going to allow the tank to free rise to 60 degrees to finish fermentation. Once complete, you want to dump the yeast from your fermenter or transfer the beer to a secondary fermenter. For lagers, it's best practice to chill the fermenter at a rate of about 2 to 3 degrees every 12 hours until you reach a lagering temperature of around 32 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit. The slow cooling process allows the yeast to remain stress-free and active as they work during the lagering process. I like to add 1 tablespoon of biofine during this process to allow the clarity to get nice and bright. Allow the beer to lager for at least 4 weeks at this temperature to allow the yeast to polish up the beer. And now for the best part, the taste test. This batch was brewed 2 months ago. Same exact recipe, same process. And the first thing I notice is the clarity. Crystal clear, I can see right through it. Bright white, head of foam at the top. Seems to be pretty strong too. It's definitely hanging around to stay. Definitely has kind of a sweet toasted cracker type of aroma. What really sticks out is the hops, very floral. Another thing that's really coming through with this one is the herbal character of those hops. It's very light, it's dry. You know, I mashed this at 148 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm almost wondering if I brought that down to like 146. Maybe that might dry it out even more without changing the recipe, but definitely as I'm sitting here, that bitterness is starting to kick in. It's lingering a little bit more. Yeah, I love Pilsners. I will say that my favorite style is a Czech Pils. I love the spiciness from the sauce and a little more maltiness in those recipes as well, but this is a great beer. It's super simple, but I'm going to finish enjoying this beer. Thank you so much for hanging out for the German Pils brew, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe. Cheers.